Hi friends, this is Josh from musiclikeyoumeanit.com. Welcome to the next installment of the From Start to Finish Metalcore series. Today I'm going to talk about how I EQ'd the kick drum in this mix and what the decisions are that I'm making behind the scenes when I reached for the tools I chose to make these changes. First, let me show you what the kick sounds like in the context of the mix. And then let me show you what the mix sounds like again, but without the EQ plugins on this kick drum. So you can really hear how much that's helping the kick cut through. Without that EQ, it's still there, but it's really not sitting where it's supposed to be in the mix. So I'm going to show you the two plugins I use to EQ this kick in track. But first, I want to talk about what I'm trying to do when I reach for these tools. When I listen to this kick-in mic, I notice there's a couple of areas that I'd like to focus on in order to bring it closer to a final sound. There's a lot of sub in this kick, which you'll definitely be able to hear if you have headphones on or studio monitors. And while that sounds great in solo, it is really going to muddy up the mix, especially during the faster kick parts. So I want to deal with that extra sub low end. And then in the top end, I'm going to definitely need some more attack. As you could hear when there was no EQ applied to this kick drum, there is some good beater attack in the raw sound, but it's definitely not enough to cut through all of these guitars and bass and vocals, everything else in this mix. So with those two goals in mind, the first EQ that I've put on this track is the Waves SSL channel. I'll walk through the moves I've made here from top to bottom so that you can see the changes as they progress. On the top end, I'm boosting just over 7K by about 3 decibels. That's going to bring the kick attack a little more into focus. As I talked about in my last video, I've already dialed in a couple gates on this track, which gives me a little more space in the top end to boost the presence of the kick attack without having to worry about cymbals coming through in the mix. Similarly, I'm using the next band to boost even more of that kick attack so that we can get more clarity. This is a much bigger boost though. This is about 10 decibels it looks like, just under 4K. This kick was recorded with a Beta 52, and for that specific mic, the 3 to 5K range tends to have a lot of presence already baked in. So I'm taking advantage of that and really pushing that through so that we can get as much of the attack in this track as possible. With the second mid-range band, I'm cleaning up some frequencies that I thought were getting a little muddy. Now I mentioned that the big problem in this track is the sub, but part of that modern kick sound that I'm going for involves scooping out some more of the mid-range. In a mix this dense, you don't actually get to hear a lot of that frequency in the kick drum, and I'm going to need to save some space there for the bass guitar and maybe even a little bit of the bottom end of the guitars to sit. So here I've done a much bigger cut. This is over 13 decibels, just under 300 hertz. It's a little bit of a narrower band, and I've done that so that I'm removing just enough of the mid-range to allow the space I need in the mix without cutting the tone of the kick overall. This one I want to show you with the kick in solo so you can hear how big of a difference it's making. One thing I really like about this EQ is the knobs instead of charts approach lets me dial in bigger cuts like this without having to think too much about the amount of boost or cut that I'm applying. For some reason, maybe it's just a psychological thing, but when I see a huge boost or cut on a graphical EQ, it's much easier to start second guessing myself and thinking, oh, maybe it's too much. There really isn't such a thing as too big of an EQ move if it makes the track sound better in the context of the mix. So I like reaching for a tool like this, which allows me to work quickly without second guessing myself as much. With the final band, I'm adding some low end with a bell boost at about 54 hertz. I'm only adding about 3 decibels, and then I'm cleaning up some at the top here with a high pass filter at 30 hertz. The combination of those two moves then is going to give me a punchy low end without boosting too many of the sub frequencies I'm trying to be careful of on this track. The second EQ I have on this track is actually the last plugin in the chain. And this is doing the final level of polish to get the kick to that sound that you heard in the mix. Let me show you what the track sounds like with and without this EQ. So you'll notice I'm mostly using this EQ to clean up frequencies that were still giving me trouble in the mix after the SSL EQ. Again, I would have made these moves with all the other instruments playing so that I could hear the kick sound as it affected the rest of the song. I do have a little boost here around 2K because I ran out of bands on the SSL EQ and I found I was still wanting a little more mid-range in the beater attack of this kick drum. The two cuts below that are one at 500 Hz here, which is cleaning up some of those mid-range frequencies that I want to reserve for other instruments in the mix. And the last band is at 134 Hz, and this is cutting some buildup that I'm actually getting from the saturation that I'm applying on this track. As a general principle, I don't like using plugins that are going to force me to do some cleanup later, but there's always a trade-off to be made, especially when you're applying saturation. And in this case, I felt like I was still getting a lot out of using that plugin, so I was okay with the extra work of having to clean up a little bit in the low end afterwards. I'll show you how I've used saturation in a future video, but let me show you how these cleanup frequencies are really affecting this kick sound. I'm going to actually play the whole mix for this one so that you can hear how these would have sounded as I was dialing them in. So both of those are definitely allowing me a lot more space in the mix, and I'm not really missing them when I cut them out of the kick drum. The cut at 130 is actually affecting where the low end feels like it is on this kick, so I had to be careful not to cut too much, but I wanted to make sure I was cutting enough that I could fit the kick in with the other low frequency instruments in this mix. The last two bands that I have in this EQ are a high pass filter at 25 Hz and then another dip out at 45 Hz. As I was mixing this track, I was finding that the low end on this kick was still just a little bit too powerful, especially as I compared the mix across different speakers. These changes I would have applied later on during the mix revision process to help dial that back a little further and make sure that the kick was sitting where I wanted to in the mix. So that's the EQ that I'm applying to the live kick track in this mix to get the final sound you heard at the beginning. My question for you today is this. Do you follow a different path when you're EQing your kick drum? Are there ways that maybe you're tricking yourself into either applying more EQ than you need or not enough? Leave a comment below and I'll try to respond to as many as possible. I love hearing your experiences with these tools and either helping when I can or sharing in your successes when you found something that really worked for you. And finally, if you're looking to make better music, whether you're a band member, a music producer, an engineer, or just someone who's really into these genres, definitely check out my free mini workshop, which is available at musiclikeyoummeanit.com/workshop. I go over 12 key decisions that you can make during the entire lifetime of a song to help take your music up to the next level. These tips are helpful no matter what your skill level is, so there's definitely something there for everyone. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. Keep making great music, and I look forward to seeing you next time.